Hello, and welcome to Federal Gen AI in Action, brought to you by Accenture Federal Services. I'm your host, Troy Schneider. Planning for a future that includes generative AI dominates the conversation in the public sector right now. Today, we'll bring the abstract into reality and focus on how this technology is already in action and hard at work across government. We'll look at some current use cases, share best practices, and offer lessons learned to shed some light on where Gen AI is making an impact, changing the way government delivers on mission, and creating better outcomes at scale. So I'm delighted to start with our first guest today. Dr. Lynne Graves is Chief of the Artificial Intelligence Division for the Department of the U.S. Air Force. Dr. Graves, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I gave your name and title, but talk a little bit about your role in the organization. What does your job entail?
As part of the DAF, the headquarters staff, we're responsible for policy, guidance, and strategy for both the Air Force and the Space Force, because the DAF includes both the Air Force and the Space Force.
Very good. And we hear a lot about AI and its government use cases, but can you provide a little more context and detail about how your how your role sort of ties into those missions, and what type of AI issues are you working on?
Well, because we're at the policy and the guidance, and technology is moving so quickly, we need to stay closely aligned with the use cases that are coming up and make sure that we follow through on the challenge of responsible AI. As the Secretary of Defense said, the only kind of AI we do is responsible AI. And of course, that is definitely a policy and guidance area. But one thing I like to remind people is AI isn't new. It's actually evolving, and so one of the things we want to make sure that we do is we don't reinvent the wheel, start over again, that we leverage what we've already done, analyze the gaps, and then we target our initiatives to where those gaps are, our resources and strategies there. Okay,
and that it's a really good point, that this is sort of building on other work, other systems, other data sets that, that the DAF has. How has AI integration into that critical infrastructure and those existing resources sort of changed the landscape of both the potential threats and vulnerabilities that you're trying to account for?
Well, again, you need to leverage what's already been there. Artificial intelligence is software, it's hardware. So all the traditional concerns of software and hardware networking are the same concerns that you're going to have anyway. So once you do that, once you realize that you already have a baseline, then you can target where the gaps and the differences are. Some of the gaps and the differences are going to be around the speed at which we're operating. And then also making sure that we preserve the human judgment and the human interaction with all of our use cases. So that it's primarily the speed, also the exposure of data. Data is very, very important for certain subfields of AI. I like to point out that there's a lot of subfields to AI, and right now most of the focus is on our machine learning efforts, and those are very heavily data-based. So you have some additional concerns when you're working with something that is so data-centric.
And so what are some of the key challenges in understanding and mitigating those risks that come with sort of leveraging AI at a higher level?
Some of the challenges are more cultural. And that's where the policy and the guidance comes in programs like this. So once you understand the cultural, there's also digital literacy concerns to making sure that people understand exactly what they're talking about. When people start to use terms of art and they're coming from a different domain, perhaps we're talking past each other. So that's a concern. But we have different when we take our legacy approaches, there are slight nuances, and so that's where the responsible AI tenants are coming into play to help us identify those gaps and focus our areas on that. One of the ones that is very, very important to me is warfighter trust. For warfighter trust, we have to look at our test and evaluation, verification, and validation framework, and we need to do some modifications to what we've done in the past. But warfighter trust is very, very important. One thing we cannot forget with AI is that the technology changes. It has been changing, and it will continue to change, but the one constant we have are the people. And so we need to not forget our people, focus on our people, understand as we employ efficiencies, where we redirect our human resources, but our human resources don't go away. It's just human judgment and human inject points. And then the other thing I like to emphasize is we need to keep the human skill sets up. When you have a compromise or a breach, and we read about them in the news all the time, the companies that are able to move on are the ones that can revert to manual. And the only way you can revert to manual is if you have humans still available, still skilled. And so I like to remind everybody, yes, artificial intelligence is great. We've got efficiencies, we've got faster performance, but we can't forget the human factor.
Sure. And you talked about how, you made the important point that AI is sort of continually changing, and so it's bringing both new opportunities, new challenges. Can you maybe give some examples of where the thinking in the DAF has had to change as we've moved from advanced analytics to machine learning to now maybe beginning to explore the potential of generative AI?
So it's all related to the human-machine teaming and the balance of where it's going on the scale from primarily human with minimal team to more artificial intelligence balancing. But the thing we have to remember is that the intention is not to replace the human, but to team it, to make it more efficient, more efficient both in terms of human resources, but also in terms of the machine resources. And so the changes are still evolutionary. They're still not revolutionary, but the governance needs to focus more on the specific use case. When you had more what I would call normalized technology, you could have a broader stroke. With AI and the individualized use cases, each one's going to have to be evaluated at some level for its uniqueness. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all at the deeper level. At the higher level, you can have general policy and guidance, but we understand that there are going to be use cases that need to be examined a little bit further and a little deeper, and the DAF is fully committed to having that kind of a use case review. Okay.
And you mentioned a couple of the specific risks that are out there that have to be managed and mitigated. You know, the exposure of data, you know, maintaining the warfighter trust. How do you approach that balancing of the, you know, the opportunities that these AI solutions can bring with some of the new risks that they might open up?
So it depends on what you're looking at here. If you're looking at integrating AI into an infrastructure, then you're going to do the same business case analysis you always have. What are the risks and what are the benefits? So that again is going to be on a case-by-case basis. Each program office, each command, as they integrate, will have to do a risk-benefit analysis. Risk-benefit analysis is something that the DAF is very familiar with. We've been doing that one for a long time. If you're actually talking about the AI infrastructure itself, like the algorithms and the models, then you're talking about an R&D perspective, and then you're going to be looking on your return of investment. So two very different ways of talking about AI. Are you talking about AI as the tool that you're integrating, at which point risk-benefit? Are you talking about AI as the concept where we're talking about R&D and then return on investment?
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about some of the specific use cases? I mean, to the degree you can get specific. I'm curious about, you know, are there any like success stories that you want to share, or places where we're really seeing the innovative impact of bringing AI to bear?
So at a very high level, without getting into the details, very excited about the DAF Battle Network. That is a long-going process where they have been experimenting in investigating the use of AI, where you have various domains that need to be, how shall I put it? You have various domains. The information all needs to be coming in from various locations as well as various information gathering devices. And it needs to be at the speed of relevance for people in the field to be able to make decisions. And so I would consider where they're moving and what they're doing with the DAF Battle Network to be one of the success stories for integrating AI into the DAF.
Well, that raises the interesting point of getting different systems and different stakeholders collaborating when you're trying to integrate so many different different data sets and different sources of information. What role does collaboration play between different components of the DAF and between public and private partners to really move these AI initiatives forward?
Different components of the DAF, I would say that we have been coming to this combined approach for a long time now. So the good news is it's not revolutionary, and people across the DAF understand that they are not operating in silos. Public and private, it's very interesting. We have a tendency to think of the private as the innovation hub, and then the public, or at least the DAF, more as the policy and guidance. And only when you bring those two together are we going to have efficient and responsible use of AI in the DAF. And so that's a very symbiotic relationship, bringing the innovation from the private side together with the policy and the guidance from the DAF. And that's where we're going to be successful, taking the great ideas and using them in the manner in which we're authorized to use them. It's interesting the way the dynamics are working between the two. Policy and guidance needs to be aware of what's coming down the pike. And then what's coming down the pike also needs to be aware of the guardrails that policy and guidance establish.
Well, and you've made this point several times in the conversation about how important the policy and the guidance and the standards are. You know, technology is a big part of this, but it's hardly the only leg of the stool. As AI technology continues to evolve, are there particular areas of the policy and guidance pieces of the puzzle that you think are going to need particular attention? Are there places where we have to be especially mindful of keeping up with the advancements?
Modifying policy and guidance needs to be done deliberately, and if you do the policy and guidance correctly, it's not going to change every time you have a technical advance. Technology changes way too fast for that. If every time, if we tried to write our policy and guidance, it would already be expired by the time we went to implement it, especially because of all the stakeholders you have to get together to come up with the policy and guidance. So it needs to be broad enough and high level enough that it guides, literally guidance, without trying to be responsive to every part of a hype cycle. But moving forward, I think we're going to have to also be able to distribute and disseminate some of that, because the use cases will be different and the use cases will be unique. And so understanding how we can have the high-level policy and guidance and yet provide enough of the guardrails for each implementation is going to be the delicate balance. And I think that when you hear people talk now, especially in the government realm, when we talk about generative AI, you're going to hear a lot of people talk about guardrails. So that's what we're focusing on, is the guardrails, making sure that we stay within the acceptable realm. Acceptable both for efficiency's sake. We don't want to be adopting anything that comes down the pike, the shiny new thing, but also acceptable for both what the public and what the department considers to be an appropriate use. A responsible use is the term we like to use.
Very good. So we're almost at time, but your job sits at the intersection of just some fascinating technologies and opportunities, and you really are kind of working a bit in the future here. As you're looking to make sure that AI is leveraged in the most responsible and effective ways for the DAF, what's on your radar? What should we be focused on over the next 6 to 12 months as this space continues to evolve?
I think what we need to be focused on is the complexity of AI. Most of what we do is going to require not just one solution. So most of what we do may need some of the old versions of AI. And that's the other thing I would like to point out. We need to make sure we're not myopic and conflate machine learning with AI. AI is a broad spectrum with a lot of subfields. And if we get myopic on one thing, focusing on machine learning, then maybe we have more appropriate, perhaps more traditional versions of AI that we're not investing in or we're forgetting about. And so for AI to be effective across the DAF, we need to look at the whole spectrum of it. And so maybe we need to be combining some of our older expert-based AI systems with some of the new generative ones, and together we get the better product. And I think if you look at most of the use cases in the DAF, you're going to find that it's not one implementation of AI. It's going to be a complex layering of them. And so the intricacies, the way they come together and they interact will be something that we need to be very aware of and be able to address.
Very good. Well, this is clearly a conversation we're going to need to continue in the coming months. But Dr. Graves, thank you so much for being part of today's conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, I'll shift focus from the use of AI by the Department of the Air Force to the use of AI by the U.S. Postal Service. Plus, we'll look at where ChatGPT and natural language processing fold in. You're watching Federal Gen AI in action on GovExec TV. I'll be right back. Welcome back to Federal Gen AI in Action, brought to you by Accenture Federal Services. I'm your host, Troy Schneider. The U.S. Postal Service has a relatively new plan called Delivering for America that focuses on customer experience, service delivery, and security. And one day soon, artificial intelligence will be inextricably linked to all three. Let's learn more now. Let's kick things off. We have Pritha Mehra, who is with the U.S. Postal Service as Chief Information Officer. Thank you so much for being here today.
Happy to be here, Troy.
And we have Viveca Pavon-Harr with Accenture Federal Services, and Viv directs the Applied Intelligence Discovery Lab.
Thanks for having me, Troy.
Thank you for being here. So I'd like to give each of you a chance to talk about your role in a little more detail. And Pritha, let's start with you. Can you just explain what your job entails and how AI is shifting what you do?
Sure. So as a CIO, of course, I have to bring in the technologies, but most importantly, my function is to bring in the enabling platforms for our critical and mission critical functions. As you all might know by now, that we have a very solid Delivering for America plan, and we're on the second year of it. And part of that plan is essentially, the key word is transformation and modernization. So of course, we play a very critical role in that, where we are modernizing many of the mission critical platforms. And of course, AI and machine learning are at the foundation of it. We've been in the inference-based AI for a long, long time, and now we're playing around in the generative AI to see how that will really catapult and leap us forward in many of the different business applications. So yeah.
Wonderful. And yeah, I want to come back to how those use cases are evolving and how it sort of changes the planning that your organization needs to do. But Viv, same question to you. Tell me a little bit about your job and the work that you're doing on AI in the public sector.
So as a director of the Analytics Innovation Hub, I have the great pleasure of working across multiple agencies in vetting and trying out and piloting really a lot of the new models and AI and ML implementations. And of course, this ranges from our true and tested machine learning algorithms and things that we've deployed and have had in place for multiple years and are now just retesting, recalibrating, all the way to testing new technologies and new models such as generative AI. But working across multiple agencies and multiple spaces in the federal government makes it interesting, having to deal with different securities, different mission projects, and different acceptance for AI in general.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And we're going to talk about the Postal Service's Delivering for America efforts in a moment. But can you give us a sense of some of the examples of whether it's specific projects or the types of projects that are underway with some of your federal customers right now?
Well, right now, generative AI is the craze, right? So we are building a lot of different generative AI fit for federal. And I think that's something that we really have to embrace, is the idea of how do we transform something that was clearly designed for an open forum using and tested and trained with open data to now be implemented in a secured and environment that requires so much trustworthiness, such as the federal space. So we are developing models, just to be able to read reports, analyze, summarize, the direct interactivity that we're accustomed to with some of the GPT evaluations out there, and then also using them for code generation and code translations. As we go through this modernization phase, we definitely need to start evaluating, what do we have, and how have we gotten accustomed to, as the federal space, to use our tools? How do we bring them now to become more accessible and to be implemented in environments that allow for faster processing and quicker ingestion pipelines?
Thank you. And Pritha, can you talk a little bit about some of these data and AI initiatives that are kind of cornerstones of the Delivering for America effort?
Sure. I mean, if you look at it, maybe I can talk across three spectrums. One is driving customer excellence, right? So we look at ways to really use smart models and inference-based models, looking at historical, looking at all kinds of variables to drive experience, whether it is giving a customer an accurate prediction of when they're going to receive their mail and packages, whether it is helping a customer when they call a help desk, speeding them through it with providing machine learning algorithms, natural language processing capabilities to get quick answers to our customers. And then, of course, we are leveraging a lot of SaaS products that have inbuilt. On the operations side, there's tremendous machine learning capacities and capabilities. If you think about it, whether it comes to using these models to predict the volumes that we expect at facilities for expedient processing, whether we want to look at Sunday route optimization, you name it, and there are tremendous capabilities there. On the security side, of course, we are looking at and leveraging language models, machine learning models to really hone in on our endpoint protection, and our asset protection, and detecting anomalous behaviors, and really strengthening our segmentation models around our network, given that we have such a vast network. So those are some of the, then of course, natural language recognition is one that we've been kings at, because we process mail, we read envelopes, we detect patterns. So, and of course, we've taken that to the next level of truly understanding a package label, cover, and to understand whether it's hazardous material or if there's any risk to the package. So yeah, there's really a plethora of applications that we use machine learning models. And now a big one is fraud. We've got some very advanced models that we're using in the fraud detection space to really hone in on where people are not paying for packages. So yeah.
And I want to come to you in a minute on the security and fraud side, because obviously those are use cases and mission needs that apply across government. But I want to spend a minute on some of the inference-based efforts the Postal Service has been doing, because optimizing delivery, predicting delivery times, figuring out those routes, that's work that the Postal Service has been doing and leveraging AI for a long time now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
we
have.
And I'm curious if there's kind of a substantial phase shift in that, where AI has certainly become the hot topic in government over the last several months. Has the type of analysis and inference-based work that Postal Service can do, has that changed dramatically over the last 6 months to a year, or is it more of a incremental progress?
I would say it's more of an incremental progress. I think we are looking at, how you start with certain inference-based models. We've been looking at open source models that we then take and tweak to and personalize to our environment. I think this generative AI is probably going to help us in many areas, which could speed up the way we use we use the modeling capabilities.
Great. And Viv, I'm curious if those three categories sort of resonate with you. I mean, operational needs are different from agency to agency. When you get into the customer experience side, the security, the fraud detection side, it seems like those are applications that are pretty common across organizations. Is that where you're seeing most of the demand?
There is a lot of demand in that area. And I actually very much appreciate the fact that from a federal space, we are focusing so much on the customer experience side, because that is where we're servicing. And so much is being built out across multiple agencies, where it is to empower American citizens to be able to use and leverage the data that the federal government has harnessed in a secure and proper manner. And I think that's a lot of where we leverage AI, where it becomes public knowledge. But like Pritha was saying, there's so much of just getting a package today was guided by a lot of the same principles. But we see it across multiple areas of the federal space. I mean, today we can talk about how first responders are being powered by AI, and that is helping make determinations of what areas they should go to and what areas might be a little bit too dangerous and we might need to wait for natural disasters to not be of direct impact. And so all of these things end up being human directed. And I think that's a lot of the power that comes from the customer experience. And then from an operations perspective, we see it a lot too. And I'm glad that we started with the idea of natural language processing, because so much of the information that we're getting from operations is just text that we need to process in a very direct and rigorous way. And we're able to go through that. We have agencies where we're helping them through their HR systems and HR capabilities, just processing a resume. That's all text, and we need to figure out a way to make that unbiased and make sure that it is a quick process and that people are not waiting in pipelines. And we're doing this across multiple agencies, again, leveraging AI and ML in a very as easy way as possibly made.
Very good. And the you've both mentioned ChatGPT and the generative AI side. Natural language processing has been about sort of ingest, and now we're moving to using AI to really create content. I'm curious how that's changing these missions in the three buckets we talked about and others. And so, Pritha, maybe start with you there. How does the potential for generative AI kind of change the capability conversations for the Postal Service?
I think that there's a tremendous potential across all business spectrums, really. I mean, so I can tell you how we're dabbling in it. We've started, one is you have to train your teams to be able to really use it. So we've created sandboxes, and we are taking the low-risk applications just to train the force on how to bring this into the organization. I think conversational AI based on that will really catapult business decisioning. So I think the other thing that one should not fail to mention is organizing data, right? Because in order for you to derive the maximum value through these applications, you want to be able to make sure your data and your assets have been cataloged and understood, and that you have the right definitions and for the decision making. The other area that we are playing around with is really in the technical workforce augmentation. So looking at developer assist tools for code translation and then for code generation, which I believe will have a tremendous opportunity in speeding up development and also bringing greater value and accuracy. As you can imagine, we have over 900 applications, some of which are legacy and perhaps not well documented. And to use these contextual search capabilities around the generative AI, we're already doing that and saying, voila, in a week we are able to decipher something that perhaps would have taken a long time to do. So I think it's a very exciting time, but there is a lot of fear of the unknown. And so really bringing in those definitions, partnering with those solution providers to understand how to bring it in ethically and responsibly is an exciting thing for us right now.
Excellent. And Viv, we're going to get into this a lot more after the break, but briefly, are there other use cases or sort of first order questions that you think government leaders should be keeping in mind when we think about how generative AI is coming into the conversation?
Well, I think we have to keep in mind that this was the first AI that was specifically designed to interact with a human. And that's where we're seeing and why we've seen such a huge boom, in my opinion, because we've had this, it's no longer, like you framed it, it's no longer an output. Now there's this interactivity that occurs that brings people in and that allows you, it's like having a conversation. And that's exciting. Now, I want to point out that everything that Pritha mentioned as a data scientist is thrilling. I am very excited to hear of all the implementations that they have at Postal, because I think those are some of the best use cases that we can think of how it can be leveraged to assist on tasks that today have become a little bit cumbersome. You know, the text, or the code to English translation, just being able to annotate your code. Sometimes data scientists just do not do a great job at doing that. And to be able to have that assistance, that code assistance implementation is invaluable and will only allow for future users. And once that one person is on PTO for a week, there is no issues of what the code is doing or what may be delayed, because that is annotated in a way that makes it easily digestible.
Excellent. Well, we need to take a short break, but thank you both for being here, and we'll dive back in here in just a few moments. Welcome back, everyone. And Viv, Pritha, thanks again for being here for this important conversation. So Viv, I want to pick up where we left off. And we were talking about generative AI, but earlier in the session, we talked a little bit about natural language processing. Maybe can you level set for us and talk a little bit about how NLP plays into these government missions and how that's been something of a building block for generative AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So NLP is pretty much the precursor of generative AI. It has helped build some of the foundational models that we're getting accustomed to. But we've used it for decades now. And it is because when we think about data, I remember the times when we would say data and people were just thinking numbers or tables or zeros and ones. And we are far beyond that, because the richness of the data that we actually have comes in the form of text. That's how we communicate. Imagine that. So when we use NLP, we're trying to get that context, and we're trying to understand what it is that is happening from a human interaction and human behavior. So we've been harnessing NLP tools for multiple years now, making sure that they're implemented in the federal space to capture not just what people are saying, but also the documentations that we have in place, and being able to extract from that.
Okay. And Pritha, natural language processing has been a huge part of the Postal Service's work, and you've touched on that with just handwriting recognition. But are you seeing that same progression of building on the investments that the Postal Service has made in the recognition and processing side, and then starting to pivot to generative AI?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the two areas come to mind. One is customer support, for our help desk. We've used NLP in a big way. We've taken models and we've personalized it to postal lingo, and we've, and using that very effectively to be a lot more responsive to our customers' requests on where's my package, or scheduling a passport appointment in the post office, or whatever it might be. And same thing with character recognition, and as I mentioned on the packages, detecting hazardous material or high risk or fraudulent packages. So yes, those are absolutely providing a foundation upon which we can then leverage and really sort of grow our applications with a lot more intelligence. I know that is happening in a big way in our fraud detection area, where we've built some traditional models, but now building on those models, we're looking at applying generative capabilities to be even smarter about detecting and responding to fraudulent activity.
It's beautiful what Pritha says, because it's this progression of just how we as humans do something very mundane as sending a package. But then on the back end, you have, an optical character recognition, scanning the label and identifying where it needs to go. But then there's also this NLP that identifies and model these natural language processing models that are identify, who it's going to, and have they paid, and have they done all these other things, and building all of these models on top of that. So these, like I said, serve as some of the foundation for what we end up deploying.
Very good, and that's very helpful, because I think where I have trouble connecting the dots sometimes is from the analysis of natural language processing and how to sort of build that generative layer on top for both the kind of package routing and package tracking, but also the fraud side of and the ways that we're not talking about use cases that are purely natural language processing or purely generative AI, that they're really going to be interlinked, I think is helpful. And Viv, could you talk a little bit about some of the use cases? We hear about customer service and better, smarter chatbots a lot, and that's an important one. But what are some of the other use cases, whether it's fraud recognition or others, that you're seeing?
There's when it comes to implementing generative AI in a lot of these spaces, there is a huge amount of information that we still have to learn from, and there's still a lot of green space for us. But there's a couple of areas that I think we should really touch on. Number one is the idea that we can summarize vast amounts of information in a very succinct and precise way. Now, granted, all of these models really need to be tuned to the context and the information that has been presented. And Pritha said she put it into postal lingo, and I like that, because it's very much how we communicate, and a lot of how we end up having to train models for the use cases that we have. So if I have a large corpus and I want to summarize something, or I want to understand something rather quickly, that capability of running LLM and ask it to give me context and then tell me where it got the information from is very powerful, because we know that unfortunately LLMs have the tendency to hallucinate. We can limit that. We can put guardrails that limit how much of that happens, and then we can also ask it, okay, well, tell me where you got the information from. So when you think about it from a federal space for reporting, for think of a congressional report. You might want to know where all this information came from to make sure it's going to the right source. Then we can talk also about the generation of images or even just synthetic data. In the medical field, as you could imagine, we want to be able to run experiments, and we don't want to use human or PII, human information or PII. So we want to be able to create vast amounts of synthetic data that can resemble human interactions, human behavior, human trajectories, and it's easier to do this when we have these type of tools and technologies. And then, of course, some of the methods that Pritha talked about, where we discussed, code generation, code assistant, code translations. Those are here all designed to really just expedite and provide efficiencies in how people are behaving.
Very good. So the next question is definitely for both of you, but Viv, I want to start with you, and it's about what questions an organization needs to ask to be ready to launch and make sure, to determine, is this a use case where AI makes sense? What types of AI are appropriate? And, how do you, where do you start that conversation? Because if you're talking about large language models, that brings a whole other set of questions, risks to consider. When you're talking to a partner in government, how do you start the conversation to figure out if this really even should be a discussion about AI?
I think a lot of what we have to consider here is it repeatable? Are we looking at a model where we can repeat what's happening? Can we learn from how people have, how human beings have actually responded to something in the past, and is that repeatable? And then we have to be very judicious of, should we be leveraging technologies to do that, or should a human being actually be the one making those determinations? And then there's, of course, the other complexities that come into play of, like, do we have the data? Do we have the right processing power? Do we have the technology? And do we have the trained individuals to be able to run those models? And then lastly, I'll say, do we have the acceptance threshold for some of those models to be comfortable with what they're producing? I don't ever think that there should be a scenario where we are taking an output and just running with it. On the contrary, I think there should be a human vetting some of those responses and definitely doing the contextual implementation for what they end up being.
And Pritha, anything you'd add there? I suspect there's also the issue of expectations from elsewhere in an organization where they say, we should, they want to bring AI to bear on their particular mission challenge. How do you steer those conversations? What questions do you ask?
I think the first question we always look at in our organization is, what is the value? And can you measure the value? And what are you promoting here? I mean, when you talk about this, I think it pretty much can have value across the spectrum, whether it's product positioning, whether it's service excellence, whether it's customer excellence. I think all of that, there are sort of applications that one can derive from it. I think where we look at things is always prioritizing the value to understand where is the value. And we're a trusted government partner. So for us, trust and responsibility is supreme. So making sure that the data is always protected and that we are not infringing on any privacy, that is a big thing for us. So and the third aspect is really training and adoption, which is really also critical for us to, at the CIO, one of the things we don't want to do is to be the barriers of innovation. And so we have jumped on it pretty quickly. We're doing a lot of workshops. We're, inviting a lot of our technology partners to bring in the understanding. But then when they come in, we also want to make sure that there's a value proposition here for us to pursue, because it is an investment. No matter what application you work on, it's a big investment. So, and then also building our skill sets, to me, that is really, really important and critical.
I'm glad you went to how to identify and measure the value, because a key question here is, how does one measure success for these initiatives? And you touched on a few metrics there, but are there standards or kind of thresholds that count as success that are unique to an AI initiative? Or is it truly just about measuring value in terms of the mission outcome?
I think it's the latter more than the former. It's just another technology you're bringing in. But what is the mission critical value that you're going to drive? Are you going to be able to optimize our network better? Ensure that our transportation and logistics infrastructure is optimized. And there are many metrics around all of that we have in the Postal Service, especially with the Delivering for America plan. If you look at that plan, it's across the spectrum, across the entire business and the entire logistics infrastructure. So we don't have any dearth of metrics in measuring value, the business value, really.
Yeah. And Viv, how do you approach the metrics and kind of success measurement question? Not every organization has a plan as well defined as the Delivering for America plan. What are the questions that you pose to your partners?
So there's two sides of it, and I agree with Pritha's approach, and I'll talk about that one second. I think the first one is going to be like, what are some of the model responses? Is the output performing as we expect it, and is it continuously performing that way? Because there's time, there's decay, there's model drift, there's all these other features that happen as you implement technology that we need to account for to make sure that we are still giving that set level of accuracy. And this is because there's a risk threshold that we're all comfortable with. That we say, 80%, 90%. What are we comfortable with what the model is saying that we're going to go along with it? So I think following those guidelines from a mathematical perspective is first, making sure that we're deploying something that's actually accurate. And then second is, what is the actual value to the mission itself? Are we actually decreasing times? Are we actually providing efficiencies? Is this actually improving people's lives and work environment, or are we creating a hurdle? And I think every mission is different, but I think at the end of the day, everyone is trying to make sure that any adaptation of technology or improvements in this scenario are leading to better efficiencies and better work environments.
We are just about out of time, but I have one final question for each of you, and Viv, we'll start with you. Is there a final takeaway that you have for public sector leaders, whether a lesson learned you want to share or a challenge question you'd like to pose to them?
I think it's more of a challenge in general, not a question, but AI, technology, generative AI, LLMs, they're here to stay. And we have to find a way to live with them and to make them adaptable to the work environments that we want to have. And I think that having a understanding of how they operate and the benefits, what are some of the security features, understanding that all of these are really a part of the entire package is something that will make it easier to adapt and help them evolve.
Very good. And Pritha, we'll give you the final word. What's your, what's your big takeaway when it comes to AI and public sector in the middle of 2023?
I'm actually very excited with this technology. I think that there is a tremendous capability building here that, and if you don't jump on the bandwagon, you might be left behind. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity. I also feel that one has to, tread this carefully and prudently to make sure that you are doing it in a responsible manner, especially for us government agencies. And I think it's really important to engage and develop that understanding across the organization so that you can allow people to come up with their innovative ideas. Because as a CIO, ours is to lay the foundations and then allow the innovation to occur. And that's what I intend to do, and I'm certainly very excited about this new technology.
Very good. There's so much more we could discuss here, but we are at time. I want to thank you both for sharing your insights today, and it's a great conversation. I hope we get to continue it again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To all our speakers, thanks for joining us. And a special thank you to you in the audience for tuning in. I hope you walk away from today's conversations with a few notes about how to map out a future that includes generative AI in your organization. For GovExec TV, I'm Troy Schneider. Have a great day.